At 11 each night, the young officer phoned his supervisor with an intelligence report, but his activity led to no arrests. Then, after a Friday night football game, Raffield failed to call in. Hello, welcome back to my channel. I'm Jess Cannell, and if you're new, then welcome. I would love to earn your subscription today. Okay, at the start of this video, I have 4 things to say, which is I had a wonderful vacation with my children, got to see family. It was really great. I'm really thankful to have had that time, and maybe you can tell I'm really sunny and I've got sunburns, and it's okay because it was just fabulous. The second thing is that many of you mentioned a janky ceiling fan in the room. And I don't know if it just suddenly changed or if we're suddenly all becoming aware of it, but now I feel hyper aware of it. I'm sorry about it. It just is what it is. I'm going to keep the fan on. But yeah, that's that. And the third thing is that we are doing a story today that is different and yet a little bit related to the JFK assassination. So I hope you'll still tune in, even though it's a slightly different topic. And then the fourth thing is that if you missed it, make sure you go back to see the Robert Groden episode that I released last week. Because there are going to be more coming. And I wanted you to have that foundation as we go into future conversations with Mr. Groden. So I hope you will go back and do that if you missed it. If you caught it, I hope you loved it. It was really meaningful to me to get to share that story. And so I wanted to bring it to all of you. Today, we are getting into a story that I was inspired by because this is a story that goes back to my childhood in Midlothian, Texas. It happened semi-near where I grew up, actually. And also it relates to the JFK assassination. So we're just going to jump right into a Time magazine news article to get us into the story. And then we're going to go through 2 other articles that give some other context. So the first one is by Time magazine. It's from November 9th, 1987. It's called The New Kid. A cop is shot at a Texas school. This happened when I was 8 years old, and I have vague memories of it. I knew the community was talking about it. I knew it was a very big deal. And I knew that one element in the story, I believe, happened in an old abandoned house that was in the field behind where I grew up. So I'm looking forward to reading this story with you to get into it from an adult angle because, like I said, I think at 8 years old, I probably just heard the rumblings of it and I knew the general shape of the story, but I wasn't really allowed to hear every possible detail. So let's read. Although he looked older than the other kids, he tried to fit in by wearing punk t-shirts. There was something oddly out of place about George Moore, the new addition to the senior class at Midlothian High, 30 miles outside of Dallas. Last week, all of Midlothian, population 7,500, learned Moore's secret. He was really George Raffield Jr., 21. A rookie officer working undercover for the local police department to ferret out drug use among the 765 students. On October 24th, his body was discovered in a clump of cedar trees near town, a .38 caliber bullet hole in the head. His cover was blown, and he was murdered because of it, said a Texas Ranger investigating the case. The killing stunned residents of the blue-collar community, where many were unaware that a drug problem even existed. Ours is certainly no worse than other towns, certainly not as bad as Dallas, said school counselor Perry Elkins. At the trim Pebblestone School, where short skirts and exposed shirt tails are banned, and still were when I graduated in the 90s. We had the highest dress code, I believe, in all of Dallas area. But of course, as high schoolers, we grew to resent it. But over time, I did think that it actually contributed to good learning outcomes. It just kept things a little tidier. At the trim Pebblestone School, where short skirts and exposed shirt tails are banned, only 4 students have been dismissed for drug use in 4 years. And a surprise inspection with drug-sniffing dogs last year turned up nothing. Nonetheless, last May, the city council responded to pleas from Chuck Pinto, who's the city manager, and police chief Roy Vaughan by authorizing $10,000 for a larger community narcotics operation. We had suspicions that things were going on, explained Pinto. In July, Raffield, a short, muscular ex-police dispatcher from a neighboring town, was hired and assigned to undercover work. At the school, Raffield quickly aroused suspicion. When someone tries so hard to fit in fast, you know something is wrong, said a teenager familiar with the scene. Raffield obviously was not a typical student. For one thing, the school assigned him 3 lunch periods. Oh my goodness, that sounds really obvious. Some students called him 21 Jump Street after the TV show about undercover cops on the high school beat. So they were pretty on to him from the start. I mean, if you look at this guy, he is one of those people who probably, you can just imagine, like he probably shaved at 5 p.m. and by 6 p.m. he had a 5 o'clock shadow going again. Like he looked really severely masculine for supposed to be passing off as a high school student. At 11 each night, the young officer phoned his supervisor with an intelligence report, but his activity led to no arrests. Then, after a Friday night football game, Raffield failed to call in. Acting on a tip, police searched for and found his body the next day. Hours later, they arrested Richard Goglin Jr., 17, and a 16-year-old who is the son of a Dallas police officer. I suppose that's a journalistic decision not to print the name of a 16-year-old. Chief Vaughan insists that he would have yanked Raffield out if anyone had realized the danger. Says Justice of the Peace Glenn Ayers, something went badly wrong. We're all trying to find out why. So that's from November 9th, 1987. The next July, D Magazine published a couple of articles about this that we're going to read. One is called A Police Chief's Bad Luck Continues. It's by a man named Tom Dodge, July 1st, 1988. At this point, the trial was going. And so the nation was looking back. And also there's this connection to the JFK case that I mentioned to you earlier. It says, the slate and the nation are watching the trial of the Midlothian high school students who allegedly murdered undercover officer George Raffield, who posed as a student in order to penetrate the high school's drug rings. The event has already meant unflattering publicity for Police Chief Roy Vaughan, who sent Raffield into the school. It's not the first time Vaughan has caught the lightning. On November 24th, 1963, Vaughan, then a Dallas policeman, had been assigned to guard the ramp beneath the Dallas City Jail, as Lee Harvey Oswald was to be transported to the county jail. We recently had an episode about this. According to the Warren Commission, it was during the 45-second period in which Vaughan left his post to direct traffic around the convoy's lead car, leaving the basement, that Jack Ruby walked down the ramp and killed Oswald. Yes, that is what the Warren Commission asserted. It is never what Roy Vaughan asserted. And actually, we're going to get a little peek at his own thoughts about it here. During his testimony before the commission, Vaughan never wavered from his belief that Ruby did not pass him on that ramp and that the nightclub owner must have gained access to the area from some other entrance. The results of 2 polygraph examinations supported Vaughan. However, the eyewitness testimony of former policeman N.J. Daniels, whose account we read in that last episode, if you missed it, the eyewitness testimony who saw a man resembling Ruby walk down the ramp 3 to 4 minutes before the murder of Oswald painted a different and more damaging portrait. Yes, if you take policeman Daniels' perspective, then there's no other way to see it but that Chief Vaughan had knowingly allowed Ruby to pass. The commission did not pursue the matter, preferring to believe that Ruby did, in fact, get by Vaughan unnoticed, but that Vaughan was not at fault, negligent, or responsible in any way for the death of Oswald. But Vaughan received rougher treatment in Executive Action, a 1973 movie posing the theory that Kennedy's murderers were hired and trained and eventually disposed of by a cabal of oil men with the nodding approval of the CIA and the FBI. My husband and I recently watched this film. One of the things that we learned is that Robert Grodin did advise for that movie, and he recommended it as an interesting look at the case. We enjoyed it a great deal. Actually, it came on the heels of our daughter having come home and said, we have to watch Capricorn 1. And so we had watched Capricorn 1 as a family. Very interesting look at if you think that the moon landing was not real, then that's the kind of the look at if we were to fake a Mars landing. That's the gist of Capricorn 1, and it was a very interesting movie. It was very fascinating. But this one was Executive Action, and so I felt like we were like revisiting 70s movies that were exposing conspiracies. But Executive Action, in the film, the actor playing Vaughan deliberately turned his head as the Ruby character walks past him and down the ramp. That is what is implied by the testimony of N.J. Daniels. It sounds like, not even like he turned his head, but like he just was staring straight ahead, saw him go by, and allowed it. Vaughan filed suit against the film's production company and others involved with the film, including fellow Midlothianite Penn Jones, then editor of the Midlothian Mirror. Well, that is interesting. I didn't know that. There are these people involved in Midlothian life who all had connections to the JFK assassination. So it's fascinating to consider that he actually filed suit not just against the production company, but against Penn Jones, who I believe had given advice and input to the movie. The suit was settled out of court. That would be a big deal to have going on in your local town. Vaughan ends this article this way, which of course started out about George Raffield, but quickly was moving over to the issue of the Oswald murder. Vaughan says, I will go to my grave convinced that Jack Ruby did not enter the basement through that ramp. But with the Midlothian murder trial already in full swing, the police chief has much more timely worries on his mind. So that's a little several decades on, I guess 2 decades on look at Roy Vaughan. Very fascinating. And then, interestingly, this is another part I wanted to learn about because I remember the rumblings about this when I was a kid. There was a lot of fear about Satanism in the 80s. And this case actually connected with that. And that's what connected with the house that was abandoned behind my house. Now, where that big mansion stood is an apartment complex. But when I was a kid, we had one street of our housing development that extended out into a field that was between a really fun railroad track that we would go and explore all the time. And then there was this big, huge tumble down mansion. I was gutsy enough to go onto the porch a couple of times and to step into the main parlor of this huge old abandoned wooden mansion. It was probably a Victorian era mansion. But you could see straight through the house. It was tumbling down. The exterior was still in place, but the inside was just a mess. There was a broken down stairwell inside of it, I remember, and you could just see clear through, like weather was getting through. It was an abandoned mansion at this point in time. And I remember hearing that they had done some satanic rituals out at that house, which completely dovetailed, if you can just picture yourself as a 1987 8-year-old kid hearing rumblings about this scary mansion that's, maybe 2 acres away from my backyard. This just fit completely with those kinds of stories of like, oh my goodness, not only is it an abandoned mansion, but they're doing satanic rituals. So that was my memory of it. But here we get an article, also in D Magazine, by Carlton Stowers in July 1st, 1989. So this is almost 2 years after the murder. And it's written by the man Carlton Stowers, who I believe is the one that wrote a book about this whole incident. I think it's called Innocence Lost, maybe. The title of this article is Crime, Satanic Curses. The subheading is White Upper Middle Class Low Achieving Teenagers Are Increasingly Vulnerable to Devil Worship Cults. Why? Because, quote, kids make great victims, end quote. I have to say, none of that sounds particularly well written to me. It sounds kind of like a conglomeration of a bunch of phrases that don't actually further the story. But the mass killings at a Matamoros, Mexico ranch, apparently the work of Satan-worshipping drug smugglers, came as a gruesome shock. But for many Dallas area law enforcement officials, psychiatrists, and clergy, the horrors of Matamoros were just the latest and largest manifestation of a phenomenon that has made its way into North Texas cities. With disturbing regularity, police and members of the medical and mental health communities are dealing with bizarre stories of teenage satanic activity, ranging from participation in ritualistic killings of small animals and blood drinking to attempted and successful linked to the occult practices. But here they take us immediately into the story. Sitting in a small, sterile room at the Midlothian Police Department, a 17-year-old boy with dark, shoulder-length hair and piercing blue eyes was being questioned about his involvement in the shooting death of an undercover narcotics officer. He nervously reached into his pocket, withdrew a black plastic heart, and began repeatedly kissing it. The silver dollar-sized amulet, the youngster eventually explained, was Terry Heart, a medium he used to communicate with the spirit of a girl who had died of a drug overdose. Terry, he explained, was someone with whom he had regularly consulted. It had, he later claimed, been Terry who advised him and his accomplices that 21-year-old George Raffield, posing as a senior student at Midlothian High School until he was murdered in October of 1987, was in fact an undercover narc. It was only after consulting Terry Hart that the plan to kill Raffield began to take form. So you can see the way that this case could not be analyzed without the discussion of this potential satanic ritual and reaching out beyond the grave to the spirit of the girl who had died in the drug overdose. The two stories were connected. In my childhood mind, I knew that they said that, but I didn't know, you don't know if people are just speculating or if that's just, community rumors or that kind of thing. Richard Goglin, an admitted Satanist who had fascinated fellow students with stories of devil-worshipping rituals in which he had participated, was eventually sentenced for the murder of Raffield, along with 16-year-old Greg Knighton and 17-year-old Jonathan Job. Another Dallas area teenager committed in a cemetery near her home, leaving behind a diary in which she offered her life to the devil. Upon learning of the girl's death, the rumor quickly circulated among her friends at school that she had been involved in a ritualistic death lottery, wherein one of the group was the sacrifice to Satan. This is a hard topic, and I don't want to gloss over it. I just want to say that we are now in 2025, almost 40 years later, and we don't deal with spiritual elements like this in the open anymore. These things are pretty obscene. There's more that I can see that we're going to go through in the next bullet points. Pretty shocking, pretty overtly dark, and spiritual, clearly connected to spiritual goings on. And we don't talk or think like this anymore in modern America. It's not that it's not true, and it's not that other countries and other locations don't have close ties to the spiritual world. We just are of a very modern mindset where we pretend that these things are not actually going on. And so it's a little bit clinical and a little bit of a, cleaned up pretend world where there is no spiritual world. But these things are very shocking and sad. And, you know, if you, like I do, believe that there is a spiritual world that's active, then you are aware, as I am, that there is no playing around with the spiritual world. There are real enemies of our souls. There is a real Satan, and he desires the death of men. So some of you may not believe those things. I do. And I think this is probably the last gasp of the spiritual world overtly operating in America in a way that we really don't see anymore. So it's fascinating. Next bullet point. In Greenville, that's also here in Texas, a 16-year-old youngster disappeared from a local theater in November 1987 and was later found dead, buried in a shallow grave. A 21-year-old indicated in the slaying had 666, the biblical mark of the beast, tattooed on his forehead. Authorities also found that he owned a ceremonial black robe, candles, and a library of occult literature, including the highly popular Satanic Bible, authored by cult leader Anton LaVey. Susan Kramer, a buyer for Taylor's bookstores, says that LaVey's book, which sets forth the philosophies of the Church of Satan, published in 1969, has been a very good seller, particularly in the last several years. Those purchasing the books are generally teenagers. This is a very serious thing going on, says Dallas psychiatrist Gary Malone. It presents a very real danger that wasn't there just 5 or 6 years ago, and the danger is great. We have kids taking their own lives and doing harm to others. I find it very frightening. It gives more indication from other police departments, psychologists, ministers, and others in the mental health industry of the problem, but I don't see more details about the case. I do want to say, actually, I didn't plan to say this, but the other day, my son and I went to Six Flags together, and I went into a little shop at Six Flags, and I was surprised to see that one whole corner of the shop inside of Six Flags had very dark materials focused on teenagers. And we had a conversation about it, my 15-year-old and I, and we just talked about, you know, why would they put that here? Why do you think that is here? And it had little dolls and little teen-focused like books and trinkets that were clearly actually of this variety. Satanistic, spiritual, kind of dark, mystical, witch, this and that. And we were just talking about that when kids are away from their parents at Six Flags, that's a place where you would think you could just drop your kid and like the things that are going to be on sale are going to be like Superman capes and cotton candy and, you know, that kind of thing. But no, there is that whole thing for sale. So interesting. Well, that is the end of that case. That's the end of what I had planned to read. But this case was very sad, and I do want to honor George Raffield. It sounds honestly like he was set up. I don't mean knowingly at all. I just mean he did not look young. He was pretty buff. He was pretty big. He had a lot of facial hair, and you know how that distinction around those ages is very indicative of age, that freshmen come in and they are just baby-faced and gangly and awkward. And by the time you get to your senior year, some people still look like that, but some have got the facial hair going on and they're looking a little more like a young man. George Raffield is buried in Waxahachie, Texas. His grave is still there. It honors his police service and his life. So you could see that there. It's in, I think, the city cemetery, maybe is what it's called. But you could, if you were in the area, in the Dallas area, you can still visit that. The mansion is gone. I don't believe that's where he was murdered. I think that's where a ritual had been held. I don't remember the exact location of his murder, but they said they found him under cedar trees. And what a sad memory for my town, a sad memory from my childhood. And I just want to thank you for going through the stories with me, a little bit of my walk through memory lane, a little bit of piecing together things that were not clear, that are now a little more clear, and that look at an updated Roy Vaughan, a couple decades on from the young man who had been at the basement ramp guarding it when Jack Ruby somehow got into the basement to shoot Oswald. He contended to the end of his days that he did not observe Jack Ruby going down, that Jack Ruby could not have gotten down that way. But we each have to make our own decision about that. Thanks for listening to the story of George Raffield. I hope it was of interest to you. Let me know in the comments what was new. Had you heard about this story? Did you know about it? I know it was a national news story when I was scrolling through. It wasn't only Time magazine, but New York Times, LA Times, lots of articles nationwide about that tragedy that happened in my hometown when I was a kid. So let me know what you think of the story. Let me know if you have any other links or insights about that, and we'll see you next time. We will be getting into more JFK topics soon. Bye.